Welcome back, viewers. Donald Trump has made a statement recently at the White House saying if somebody called from a country such as Norway, he used an example there, we have information on your opponent, oh, I think I'd want to hear it. Now, that's an interesting statement coming from Donald Trump, especially at a time that the Mueller report, or the Mueller investigation, I should say, pardon me, has just wrapped up work, has released its report, redacted, of course, and not all the information has come out, but pretty much essentially absolving the Trump campaign of any collusion with Russia, but not, of course, absolving him of the more or less important charge, depending on how you look at it, of obstructing justice. Is Donald Trump saying that he would be open and that American presidents and American political candidates should be open to accepting information from foreign countries on their political opponents? And what does that then mean for American democracy and otherwise? Or is this just an overblown issue altogether? Let's discuss this a bit further. We're joined now by Benjamin Gannon, who is joining us now from Coventry in the UK. He is a teaching fellow in U.S. politics at the University of Warwick in the UK. We're joined as well by Tim Kirby, who is a political analyst for Strategic Culture, which is a think tank, and he is speaking to us now from the Russian capital, Moscow. Tim and Benjamin, thank you both for joining us. Benjamin, I wanted to start with you. How important is this, or do you think this is a bit overblown in the sense that Trump is essentially just saying, listen, this is all genuine when it comes to political campaigning. This is all fine.
I mean, I think the president definitely knew what he was doing, and I think he knew what he was saying. I think he may now try and spin this as this was just something that was said off the cuff in an interview. It was all a bit overblown. But I think definitely this is part of a deliberate attempt for President Trump to now play the outcome of the Mueller report, which you highlighted, which on the whole did fail to find any smoking gun that incriminated the president. So what he's looking to do now is probably make this kind of behavior that Mueller did identify, which was at times very close relations between Trump campaign staffers and foreign nationals, a perfectly legitimate activity. He wants to be able to say to his base, the kind of activity that we did by going out and having members speak to foreign nationals, that the Democrats did by hiring dossiers from people like Christopher Steele. This is all perfectly legitimate and acceptable behavior. It's not something we should worry about. We shouldn't consider it illegal. And that's part of the narrative he wants to do. He's going to try and have to legitimize this now. Does this mean he will accept info from foreign spies, which was kind of the takeaway that we took from this after the interview? On the one hand, well, in many ways, the United States kind of already does this in political campaigns. Lots of foreign governments look to gain their influence from campaigns. They reach out, they build relationships.
Exactly. And on that point, Benjamin, I wanted to Tim then. Tim, isn't Donald Trump, or hasn't Donald Trump just stated the obvious, as Benjamin there said, foreign governments obviously try to lobby different U.S. political candidates in their own way. And I imagine a lot of that lobbying goes along with giving dirt on their opponents.
Well, that seems very obvious to us sitting here right now, but that's not obvious to the masses in the United States, and the people who report this information in the mainstream media understand that. They don't really inform the public when they're talking about collusion or conversing with foreign governments that every political candidate from both parties for the post of President of the United States from within my lifetime has taken donations from some sort of foreign donors. So this is really some sort of selective outrage against Trump for doing something that everyone else does. Furthermore, if Trump were to actually have said on camera, yes, this is terrible, I would never take information from a foreign source. If he were to receive one email from Russia that they could find his, let's just call them his enemies, his detractors could find, then he'd be essentially, in the media sense, guilty of something. So it's best to just say, hey, everyone does this. It's no problem, no sweat. You've got nothing on me, because they don't.
So then, Benjamin, then this really follows with how concerning is this then, that foreign governments, that foreign donors have this much influence within U.S. politics? That certainly cannot be a good thing.
I wouldn't agree, perhaps, with quite the extent that this is absolutely par for the course. I mean, as I was saying before, it's certainly true that foreign governments will try and have as much influence as they can. They will reach out. They will try and build relationships, particularly when they identify figures who are likely to be important on another campaign. But that by no means is the same as saying that you will openly take intelligence from a foreign government. Bear in mind, this could be information that could be attained by wiretaps. He's saying it could be attained by running spies within the United States. It could be attained perhaps even by taking informants within the US government. And that in and of itself is something that the American public would not tolerate, the US institutions themselves would not tolerate. And that really hasn't been seen anywhere near to the same extent as Trump is trying to legitimize here. And I think in many ways, by trying to legitimize this does create a genuine problem. And we've seen that even in the reaction from within the Republican Party. They've been very quick to distance themselves from some of these claims and saying, actually, no, this isn't okay. The FEC, the Federal Election Commission, has come out and saying this is not acceptable. This would be seen as illegal. And now the problem is going to be trying to make sense in the light of the Mueller report, exactly what do we distinguish between illegal behavior, what is no longer acceptable, and what is acceptable influence, what is acceptable outreach.
Benjamin, I'm going to put a point to you, Benjamin, which I'm sure you've heard before, said by a lot of us who are outside of the U.S. looking at this, with a smile on our face, because one could argue, Benjamin, that the U.S. has interfered in many elections around the world. Isn't it then sort of interesting that the U.S. would then be concerned at any level, really, about any sort of interference in its elections?
Oh, absolutely. And as we absolutely know, the US is the biggest influencer of other elections. And this is something they'll both do very, very openly, and they'll be happy to kind of have on the record as something that they try and do. But at the same time, we know that they do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to try and influence other elections. They're the biggest and most successful practitioner of this by far. But at the same time, they don't want this happening domestically. That's not something that they would find a hypocritical stance to take, because as far as they're concerned, the difference is that even though they're being offered it, they shouldn't take it. I think for Trump, there are two sides for this. I think the international side, the side for us looking outside of this, is that he's very much saying to the world, look, I do conduct the foreign relations of the United States differently to other presidents. I'm all about transactions. What can you give us as a foreign government in exchange for our favor? It's not about building these relationships over time anymore. It's now about, hey, if you can give me something, if you can give me some dossier, some information about another candidate, maybe perhaps we will start to look more favorably on you the next time we revisit our trade or our security relations. And he's trying to signal to the rest of the world that that's what he wants to do.
Okay, Tim, if you allow me, I want to go to Tim. Tim, does this mean in some way, and I don't want to overstate this, but does this mean in some way that American democracy is really up for sale?
Well, we have to, again, look to the recent past and even the distant past, that during every election cycle, there's always accusations that dead people have been voting, there's gerrymandering, certain districts within the United States don't have very good, very long open hours for voting. There's always very large problems within the entire electoral process, and the fact that there's a two-party system. If you've ever spoken to the people who work within third parties in America, you'll understand how almost impossible it is for them to actually participate in the political process, the electoral process of the United States. So maybe we do have some problems here, but the entire system itself is plagued with various problems. And we're just sort of looking through a microscope at this one particular issue where basically we see one cell of the disease, but we don't actually see the person because we're so close up to it.
So then, Tim, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment because you're do you think that then a country like Russia, for example, would then see this system, however it's been designed, of American democracy, quote unquote, and say, listen, America is an important global player, and obviously Russia would want to have some sort of good relations with whoever comes into the White House, then why would Russia not also play the same game that everybody else in the world is playing when it comes to American politics?
Well, I don't know why Russia would be any different. I mean, as I've mentioned before, many very large companies, millionaires, billionaires from outside the United States all give large campaign donations. They expect something back in return. Everyone is trying to vie for power within the United States, within Washington. So Russia's just sort of one voice in a huge chorus of people trying to get what they want from Trump and company. So I don't really see Russia as being anything particular unique or interesting. It's just that the Democrats usually and in general use Russia as some sort of excuse because it's something scary and different, and the legacy of the Cold War still rolls on.
On that last point, then, Benjamin, what are your thoughts about Russia and how this is all played out when it comes to the Mueller reports and this entire issue of Russia collusion, which has dogged Donald Trump for a very long time, and he's still really reeling from that entire issue?
Yeah, I mean, to the extent, almost kind of leading off of what Tim was saying, I think perhaps even we can read a slightly more cynical view of this and saying, is this actually something that Trump has anticipated? He knows that the Democrats are fervently kind of anti-Russia and anti-Trump and Russia's relationship. And is he now pointing this towards even thinking maybe they're now going to start making noises about impeachment? That's something that, looking back to what happened with Bill Clinton, really served him well in many ways. It really tied public support towards him. It backfired on the Republicans. We've started to see already Democrat candidates like Beto O'Rourke, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren saying, you can't say things like this. We're going to have to call for impeachment. And maybe Trump is thinking, this wouldn't do me that much harm. Maybe some calls for impeachment right before election that actually play to my advantage. And perhaps that's maybe one of the other rationales behind why he's made these kind of statements, especially at this time now.
That's an interesting point. Tim, do you agree with that? Because certainly there has already been now talk of impeachment ever since the Mueller report came out, as redacted as it was. But then there was, this obstruction of justice issue as being, the Democrats are using that and running with it, really. And then these statements that Trump keeps coming out with, and we all know Donald Trump says what he feels. Do you think that this will all result in some sort of impeachment process?
Ready. But I think the main thing is that if these people who are so outraged by Trump and Russia and some sort of communication between them actually really cared about America, then they should use this as an opportunity to fix all the problems within the electoral process, to really clamp down on lobbying and make sure that American politicians don't have contact with very wealthy, powerful foreign individuals, especially candidates for the post of President of the United States. So it's kind of a shame that all the people who are so outraged have done absolutely nothing and have not proposed any means to prevent any sort of collusion from happening in the future or electoral meddling. I think that that's really the main focus here, and why this is all really just some sort of open-ended conspiracy against Trump and not actual outrage based on something that happened or is happening.
That's the point, isn't it, Benjamin? Because, you would wonder, listen, if you are this concerned about foreign influence in your elections, why not fix that system?
Absolutely, and these are calls that have been happening for decades now. A lot of people have complained for a very long time about the role of economic interest groups in the United States having a disproportionate amount of influence when it comes to presidential campaigning. They can give as much money as they want. They have a far greater bias than individual members of the public. That having been said, there is a strong distinction in the U.S. Between the role that companies play, the role that organizations and lobbies play, and the role that foreign governments play in elections. And for a lot of Americans, maybe they're unhappy with the amount of money that corporations get to provide, but that's a world away from the idea that foreign governments can actually come in and provide intelligence. That's something that's far less tolerated within the political system, both amongst politicians themselves, but also amongst the general public. And a lot of them, whilst they're unhappy with the fact that perhaps too much money from where they're not sure it's coming from domestically is flowing around amongst candidates, by and large, they are not happy with the fact that foreign governments can lobby in the same way. So there is a distinction between these two things. I don't think they're all part of the same problem in the U.S. public imagination at all.
That's interesting because, Tim, I threw out the name here, AIPAC and Israel and the Israel lobby, that's been discussed for many, many years as well. Why isn't that being highlighted more? And do you think that it may actually be highlighted as a result of all of this?
I think that the real reason to that is something in people's subconscious. I think there's a very large percent of the population of the United States that has this sort of projection of themselves onto Israel. They see Israel as a sort of a bastion of Westernness in a desert of barbarians. That's not my personal opinion. That's how I think that they see the situation. And so they very much project themselves onto Israel, and so they really want to promote Israel There's also, for certain forms of Protestantism, a certain religious connection with Israel, but that's a very deep, long conversation. We don't have time for that right now. But there's a reason for that hypocrisy. Russia is different. It is cold. It is scary, whereas Israel is in many ways a little mini United States within the Middle East, in the subcontinent of many, many people in the United States.
Very well. We'll leave there's our final word, but of course we appreciate both your time, insight, and analysis. That was Tim and Benjamin speaking to us there about this important topic, because it's interesting, isn't it, as we spoke about in this conversation, viewers, that Donald Trump is essentially just admitting what probably just happens, really, where foreign governments do provide information, possibly even on political opponents, to be able to have sway over certain candidates, because when that candidate, he or she, comes into office in the White House, will hopefully do their bidding when they are in the White House, when they are president of the U.S., of the world superpower, quote unquote, of course. So has Donald Trump just admitted what the establishment does anyways, and is that why the establishment is angry? And what does this even mean then about American democracy? Is it really just up for sale? Is it just whoever pays the most, the highest bidder really just comes out on top and wins? And then why just target Russia? Why not talk about the Israel lobby? Why not talk about other lobbies as well that try to influence the U.S. elections? A lot of questions, of course, open-ended, and we'll consider those questions, of course, in later shows as well here in Scope. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.